The soft afternoon light spilled through the tall windows of the university's music building, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The hallways were mostly empty on this Friday, with most students already heading home or to parties to kick off their weekend. But from one of the practice rooms, gentle piano notes floated through the air. Emily Chen sat at the upright piano, her fingers hovering nervously over the keys. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and took a deep breath. At 19, she was still finding her footing as a college freshman. The campus felt too big sometimes, the people too confident, too sure of themselves in ways she had never been. The piano had always been her refuge. Ever since she was 6, when her parents had saved up for months to buy a second-hand upright, she had found comfort in the black and white keys. They made sense in a way people sometimes didn't. There were rules, patterns, and yet endless possibilities within them. She glanced down at the sheet music before her, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She had played it countless times in the privacy of her childhood bedroom, but here in this echoing practice room where anyone passing by might hear, her confidence wavered. Emily closed her eyes and began to play. Her touch was light, almost hesitant at first, but as the familiar melody wrapped around her, she felt her shoulders relax. The music built slowly, her fingers finding their rhythm, her body swaying slightly with the gentle rise and fall of the piece. When she reached the difficult middle section with its complex runs, she slowed down, concentrating hard. Her brow furrowed as her fingers stumbled slightly over a particularly tricky passage. She paused, took another breath, and tried again. This time her fingers faltered worse than before, hitting several wrong notes that rang out jarringly in the quiet room. A sharp laugh from the doorway made her freeze. "Wow, that was something," a male voice said. Emily's eyes snapped open. Standing in the doorway was James Collins, his tall frame leaning casually against the doorframe. His dark blonde hair was perfectly styled, his clothes expensive in that deliberately casual way that screamed money without trying. At 22, he was a senior and somewhat of a campus celebrity, especially in the music department. Everyone knew James. He had won the state piano competition 3 years running. His recitals were always packed. There were rumors about record labels already showing interest in him. And here he was, watching her fumble through a piece any serious pianist should be able to play. Emily's cheeks burned. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize anyone was listening." James stepped into the room, followed by 2 other students Emily vaguely recognized from around campus. They hung back, but their curious eyes were fixed on her, making her wish she could disappear into the piano bench. "Maybe stick to chopsticks until you learn how to actually play," James said with a smirk, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being listened to, used to their opinions mattering more than others. One of his friends snickered. The other looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Emily stared down at her hands, which now felt useless and heavy on the keys. She had been playing for 13 years, had even won a few small local competitions back home. But home was a small town where being moderately good was enough to stand out. Here, at a university known for its arts program, she was just another face in a sea of talent. And James wasn't just talent. He was exceptional. Everyone said so. "I was just practicing," she said quietly, beginning to gather her sheet music. "I'll get out of your way." "No rush," James said, his tone falsely generous. "It's a free practice room, though some might argue it's being wasted at the moment." He walked over to the piano and ran his fingers lightly over the keys, playing a flawless run of the very passage she had stumbled over. The notes rang out clear and perfect, each one precisely weighted and timed. It wasn't just technically correct. It had that extra quality that separated good players from great ones. That indefinable something that made people stop and listen. "See? Not that hard," he said, shrugging as if what he had just done was as simple as tying a shoelace. The worst part was that he probably believed it. To someone like James, it probably was easy. He'd likely never had to struggle with nerves that made his hands shake, or doubt that made him second-guess every note. By now, a small crowd had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. About half a dozen students peered in curiously. Emily recognized a few faces from her music theory class. Great. Now she would forever be known as the girl who got schooled by James Collins. "I should go," Emily said, standing up so quickly she almost knocked over the piano bench. "I have a thing." "Sure, a thing," James repeated, not bothering to hide his amusement. Maybe try the art department instead? Photography doesn't require quite so much coordination. The comment stung more than it should have. It wasn't just about her playing. It was about her right to be there at all. To take up space in this world he clearly felt belonged to people like him. People born with the kind of talent that opened doors, that made others stop and stare in admiration. As Emily hurried to gather her belongings, a tall girl with brightly colored hair stepped forward from the small crowd. "Dude, what's your problem?" she asked James, her voice cutting through the awkward tension in the room. "Did someone forget to polish your trophy collection this morning?" This was Sophia, Emily's roommate. They had only known each other for a few months, but Sophia had quickly become Emily's closest friend on campus. Where Emily was quiet and cautious, Sophia was bold and outspoken, with an uncanny ability to see through people's carefully constructed facades. James looked momentarily taken aback. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of an audience. "I'm just offering some constructive feedback," he said, his smile a little less confident now. "No, you're being a jerk because it makes you feel important," Sophia replied, linking her arm through Emily's. "Come on, Em, let's go get coffee. The air in here suddenly smells like too much cologne and Daddy's money." A few snickers rippled through the onlookers. James's face darkened, but before he could respond, Sophia was already steering Emily toward the door, her head held high. "You don't have to do that," Emily whispered as they pushed through the small crowd. "Do what? Call out entitled jerks? It's kind of my specialty," Sophia replied, but her voice softened as they made it into the hallway. "Don't let him get to you. Guys like that can only feel tall by pushing others down." But as they walked away, Emily could still hear James playing behind them, the beautiful notes of Chopin floating through the air with infuriating perfection. Each note felt like a personal reminder of her own inadequacy. "He's right, though," Emily said as they stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. "I'm not good enough." Sophia stopped walking and turned to face her. "First of all, that's completely untrue. I've heard you play when you think no one's listening. You're amazing. And second of all, even if you weren't, which you are, it wouldn't give him the right to humiliate you." Emily wished she could believe her friend, but all she could think about was how her fingers had stumbled while his had flown, how the music had died under her touch while it had come alive under his. "I should have stuck with playing just for myself," Emily said quietly. "Coming here was a mistake." "The only mistake would be letting some arrogant senior with perfect hair decide what you're capable of," Sophia replied firmly. "Look, I know it's hard to believe right now, but there's more to music than just hitting all the right notes. James can play perfectly, sure, but when you play, even when you mess up, there's something else there. Something real." Emily gave her friend a grateful smile, but inside a decision was forming. She wouldn't be going back to that practice room. Maybe she wouldn't be going back to any practice room. Maybe it was time to accept that loving something wasn't always enough. Sometimes you had to be realistic about your talents. What Emily didn't know as they walked across the leaf-strewn campus toward the coffee shop was that this humiliating encounter was just the beginning. That sometimes life's lowest moments are actually setting the stage for something unexpected. And that music, real music, comes from places much deeper than perfect technique or flawless runs. Sometimes it comes from the very places that hurt the most. The next week passed in a blur for Emily. She threw herself into her other classes, finding reasons to be anywhere but the music building. When her music theory professor asked why she hadn't signed up for practice room time, she mumbled something about being busy with other coursework. It wasn't a complete lie. She did have papers to write and books to read, but the real reason hung around her neck like a heavy weight. Every time she thought about sitting at a piano again, she heard James's mocking laugh. She saw the faces of the students who had witnessed her humiliation. She felt the burn of shame that came with the memory. "You can't avoid it forever," Sophia said one evening as they sat in their dorm room. Rain pattered against the window, creating a gentle backdrop to their conversation. "The piano, I mean." Emily looked up from her textbook. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm just focusing on other things right now." Sophia gave her a look that said she wasn't buying it. "You haven't touched a keyboard in days. I've known you for less than a semester, and even I know that's not normal for you." Emily sighed and closed her book. "What's the point? You heard what James said. You saw how he played. He's right. People like me are just wasting practice room time that could be used by actual talented musicians. People like you? Sophia repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean people who play with actual feeling instead of just showing off their technical skills? Emily shook her head. That's a nice way of saying I mess up the hard parts. No, it's a truthful way of saying you play differently than him. Not worse, different. Sophia twirled a pencil between her fingers, thinking, you know what the problem is? You've only let people hear you when you're practicing, when you're focused on the mistakes. As opposed to when you're just playing. Like that night when you thought I was asleep and you were using that little keyboard with headphones. You didn't know I could hear anything, but I could see your face. You were somewhere else entirely. Emily felt her cheeks warm at the memory. She had indeed played late one night, using her small electronic keyboard with headphones plugged in. She'd played a piece she knew by heart, one she'd never share with anyone else. It wasn't technically impressive, just a simple melody she'd composed herself over the years, adding to it bit by bit as she grew older. It was personal, like a musical diary. That was different, Emily said quietly. Exactly my point, Sophia replied with a triumphant smile. When you're playing for yourself, you're amazing. You just need to find a way to play for others like you play for yourself. The conversation might have ended there if not for the loud ping that came from Sophia's laptop. She glanced at the screen and her eyes widened. What? Emily asked, noticing her friend's expression. Nothing, Sophia said too quickly, slamming her laptop shut. Emily narrowed her eyes. Sophia, fine, but don't freak out, Sophia said, reopening her laptop with obvious reluctance. I may have done something. Emily moved to sit beside her friend, peering at the screen. It was an email from the university's arts committee, confirming Sophia's submission form for the Spring Arts Festival. Emily scanned the contents quickly, her heart beginning to race when she saw her own name listed as a performer. You didn't, she whispered. I did, Sophia admitted, looking both guilty and defiant. But with good reason. You need this, Em. You need to show everyone, especially yourself, what you can really do. Emily stood up, pacing the small room. Take it back. Tell them it was a mistake. I can't. The submission deadline was today at 5. That's what the email is confirming, that they received it just in time. Emily felt panic rising in her chest. The Spring Arts Festival wasn't just any performance. It was the university's most prestigious cultural event of the year. Faculty from all departments attended. Community members bought tickets months in advance. Local press covered it. I can't do this, Emily said, her voice shaking. I really can't. You can, Sophia insisted. And more importantly, you should. This is your chance to show James and everyone else what real music sounds like. You don't understand. My stage fright isn't just being a little nervous. I completely fall apart. In my high school talent show, I literally froze halfway through and had to leave the stage. Sophia's expression softened. I didn't know that. Because I don't talk about it, Emily said, sitting back down heavily on her bed. It was humiliating. My parents had invited everyone they knew. My piano teacher was there. And I just broke. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the continued pattering of rain against the window. I'm sorry, Sophia finally said. I shouldn't have gone behind your back. First thing tomorrow, I'll go to the arts committee and explain that there was a mistake. Emily nodded, relief washing over her. Crisis averted. She could go back to playing alone in her room with headphones, safe from judgment and embarrassment. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the piano, about music, about why she had fallen in love with it in the first place. It hadn't been about impressing people. It hadn't been about performing. It had been about how the music made her feel, like she was connected to something larger than herself, something beautiful and meaningful. When had that changed? When had she started caring more about others' opinions than her own experience of the music? By morning, something had shifted inside her. She wasn't sure if it was courage or just exhaustion from a sleepless night. But when Sophia woke up and started apologizing again, Emily interrupted her. Don't withdraw my name, she said quietly. Sophia blinked in surprise. Really? Really? Emily confirmed, though her stomach twisted with anxiety as she said it. You're right. I need to do this. Not to prove anything to James or anyone else, but to prove something to myself. Sophia's face broke into a wide smile. That's my girl. We'll get you ready. We have, 3 weeks? That's plenty of time. Emily tried to match her friend's enthusiasm, but reality was already setting in. 3 weeks to overcome a lifetime of stage fright. 3 weeks to prepare a piece worthy of the university's most prestigious arts event. 3 weeks until she would potentially face the worst public humiliation of her life. As if reading her thoughts, Sophia added, "And don't worry about James, he's just one person in a big audience." But that was exactly what Emily was worried about. Not just James, but all the people who would be watching, judging, comparing. As they walked to their morning classes, she checked the festival program on her phone. Her heart sank when she saw the lineup. James was scheduled to perform his award-winning rendition of Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically challenging piano pieces ever written, and according to the program, she would be performing right after him. "I need to pick the right piece," Emily said during lunch, pushing her food around her plate without eating much. "Something I can actually play without messing up." Or, Sophia suggested, "You could play something that means something to you, something that shows who you are as a musician." Emily thought about that. All her life she'd been taught to play the classics, Bach, Mozart, Chopin. Her technical skills were solid, if not extraordinary. But her true love had always been the more emotional pieces, the ones that told a story. Later that day, against her better judgment, she found herself back in the music building. Most students were in class and the practice rooms were empty. She slipped into one, closed the door, and sat at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment before she finally began to play. Not Chopin this time, but Rachmaninoff, his Piano Concerto No. 2. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. Known for its emotional depth and technical challenges, it was a piece that had always moved her deeply. She played hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as the familiar notes surrounded her. This piece had always spoken to her soul. Its journey from darkness to light, from struggle to triumph, mirrored so much of what she felt in her own life. So absorbed was she in the music that she didn't notice the door opening slightly. She didn't see Professor Lee, the head of the piano department, pausing in the hallway, her head tilted in curiosity. She didn't know that the professor stayed for several minutes, listening with a thoughtful expression, before quietly closing the door and continuing on her way. All Emily knew was that for the first time in days, she felt like herself again. The music flowed through her, imperfect but honest. When she finally stopped playing, her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. She had found her piece for the festival. It terrified her, but it felt right. If she was going to fail, she would at least fail playing something that mattered to her. What Emily didn't know was that her decision had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Not just for her, but for everyone who would be in that audience 3 weeks from now, including James Collins, who at that very moment was rehearsing his own piece, blissfully unaware that his certainties about music, about talent, and about a quiet freshman named Emily Chen were about to be challenged in ways he could never have imagined. 2 days after deciding to perform in the festival, Emily sat at the piano in practice room 7, her favorite because of the way the afternoon light fell across the keys. Her sheet music for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 was spread before her, covered in pencil marks and sticky notes. She had been working on the piece for nearly 3 hours and her fingers were starting to cramp. The same passage had been giving her trouble all afternoon. It required a quick transition that her hands simply wouldn't cooperate with. Each time she approached it, her fingers seemed to tangle, producing a jumble of wrong notes that made her wince. "Again," she muttered to herself, returning to the beginning of the section. She played it slowly at first, then gradually increased the tempo. For a moment it seemed like she might make it through, but then, crash. The wrong chord rang out, harsh and dissonant. Emily slammed her hands down on the keys in frustration. The discordant sound echoed through the small room. "That doesn't sound like Rachmaninoff," a voice said from the doorway. Emily jumped and turned to see an elderly woman standing there, leaning slightly on a carved wooden cane. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the warmth of the day, she wore a formal-looking blouse and slacks, her eyes bright and sharp behind. Stylish glasses were fixed on Emily with interest. "I'm sorry," Emily said quickly, gathering her sheet music. "I didn't realize anyone was waiting for the room. I'll go." "I'm not waiting for anything except perhaps a decent cup of tea," the woman replied, stepping into the room. "And you should go back to measure 37. That's where you're rushing. Emily blinked in surprise. How did you know that's where I was having trouble? The woman smiled. I've been teaching piano for 53 years, dear. I know trouble when I hear it. She moved closer, her steps slow but deliberate. May I? It took Emily a moment to realize the woman was asking to sit at the piano. She nodded and slid over on the bench. The woman sat down with surprising grace for someone her age. Without glancing at the sheet music, she positioned her hands and played the exact passage Emily had been struggling with. Her fingers, thin and lined with blue veins, moved over the keys with fluid precision. The notes flowed seamlessly, each one distinct yet part of a greater whole. You see? She said, looking at Emily. You're thinking too much about the individual notes. Feel the phrase as a whole. Emily nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood. The woman must have sensed her confusion because she added, Try again, but this time sing the melody in your head as you play. Don't think about your fingers. Hesitantly, Emily placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She tried to follow the woman's advice, focusing on the melody rather than the mechanics of her fingers. To her surprise, she made it through the passage with only one small mistake. Better, the woman said with an approving nod. Much better. Thank you, Emily said, feeling a small spark of hope for the first time in days. Are you a professor here? The woman laughed, a warm sound that filled the small room. Once upon a time, yes. Now I'm just an old woman who can't seem to stay away from this place. She extended her hand. Margaret Abernathy. Most people call me Mrs. Abernathy, though some of my former students have taken to calling me the piano whisperer behind my back. Emily shook her hand. I'm Emily Chen, first year. I know who you are, Mrs. Abernathy said, surprising Emily again. Professor Lee mentioned you to me. She heard you playing Rachmaninoff the other day and was quite impressed. Emily felt her cheeks warm. She was? Indeed. She said, and I quote, There's something there, Margaret. Raw, untrained in some ways, but something real. Mrs. Abernathy studied Emily's face. She also mentioned you're playing in the Spring Arts Festival. Emily's stomach tightened at the reminder. Yes, though I'm starting to think it was a mistake to sign up. Because of stage fright? Mrs. Abernathy asked perceptively. Emily nodded. How did you know? The way you play. There's a tension in your shoulders that comes from more than just technical difficulty. You're playing like someone's watching and judging every note. Mrs. Abernathy adjusted her glasses. And perhaps someone has been. Emily thought of James and his mocking laugh. Something like that. Mrs. Abernathy nodded as if Emily had confirmed a suspicion. Well, that won't do it all. Not if you're going to play Rachmaninoff in front of 800 people. The blood drained from Emily's face. 800? Give or take, Mrs. Abernathy said with a dismissive wave. The point is you can't play for them. But that's the whole problem, Emily said, confusion clear in her voice. I have to play for them. That's what a performance is. Mrs. Abernathy shook her head. No, dear. A true performance isn't about playing for the audience. It's about playing for the music. She tapped the sheet music with one finger. Rachmaninoff didn't write this piece to impress anyone. He wrote it because he had something to say, something to express that words couldn't capture. Emily had never thought of it that way before. All her life, performances had been about showing her progress, proving her worth to teachers and parents and judges. When you play for other people, you're at their mercy, Mrs. Abernathy continued. Their opinions, their judgments, their tastes. But when you play for the music, she placed her hands on the keys again and played a brief, hauntingly beautiful phrase. When you play for the music, you're free. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily spent every available moment practicing with Mrs. Abernathy. The elderly teacher appeared like clockwork each afternoon, often bringing tea in a thermos and cookies wrapped in napkins. Brain food, she would say, insisting Emily take breaks to eat and drink. Their sessions focused, as much on Emily's mind as on her fingers. Mrs. Abernathy taught her breathing, techniques to manage anxiety and visualization exercises, to prepare for the performance. Imagine the worst thing that could happen, she instructed. Now play through it in your mind, note by note, until you reach the other side. Emily did as she was told, though the exercises often left her emotionally drained. The worst scenarios her mind conjured were vivid and painful, forgetting the music entirely, freezing mid-performance, hearing laughter from the audience. Always in these mental rehearsals, James was in the front row, his expression a mixture of amusement and contempt. Good. Mrs. Abernathy would say when Emily described these fears. Now you've lived through them. They have no power over you anymore. Emily wasn't sure she believed that, but she kept practicing both the music and the mental exercises. Slowly, something began to change. The piece became less about the notes on the page and more about the emotions behind them. Emily found herself thinking less about the technical challenges and more about the story she wanted to tell through the music. That's it, Mrs. Abernathy said one afternoon as Emily played through the first movement without stopping. Now you're playing Rachmaninoff, not just his notes. News of Emily's daily practice sessions with the legendary Mrs. Abernathy spread quickly through the music department. Students began to find reasons to walk past practice room 7, slowing their steps to listen. Some even sat in the hallway pretending to study while actually straining to hear the music within. James heard the rumors too. One day, about a week before the festival, he casually strolled past the practice room. The door was partially open, and he could see Emily at the piano, her face a mask of concentration as she worked through a difficult passage. Mrs. Abernathy sat beside her, occasionally interrupting to demonstrate a technique or suggest a different approach. Emily was playing the very piece that had been giving her trouble that first day of the passage where her fingers had tangled hopelessly. Now, though her tempo was still cautious, her hands moved with newfound confidence. The notes rang out clear and purposeful. James lingered for a moment, his expression unreadable, before continuing down the hallway. Emily didn't see him. She was too absorbed in the music, in the guidance Mrs. Abernathy was providing. Music isn't just in your fingers, the older woman often reminded her. It's in your breath, your heartbeat, the way you move your whole body with the phrase. As the days passed, Emily's playing transformed. The technical elements remained challenging. Rachmaninoff demanded nothing less. But they no longer seemed like insurmountable obstacles. Instead, they became part of the landscape she was navigating, necessary components of the musical journey. What happens if I make a mistake during the performance? Emily asked during their final session, the day before the festival. The question had been weighing on her mind, growing heavier as the performance date approached. Mrs. Abernathy smiled. You will make mistakes, she said simply. Everyone does, even the greatest pianists in the world. The difference is that great pianists don't let mistakes stop the music. They acknowledge them and move forward. She placed her weathered hands over Emily's. Tomorrow you will sit at that piano and you will play with everything you have. Not for the audience, not for the judges or the critics or the boy who thought you weren't good enough. Her eyes, kind but firm, held Emily's gaze. You will play for Rachmaninoff, who poured his soul into those notes. You will play for the music itself, and you will play for yourself, for the girl who fell in love with the piano long before anyone told her she needed to be perfect. Emily nodded, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. What if that's not enough? Mrs. Abernathy squeezed her hands gently. My dear, when you truly play for the music, it's always enough. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her dorm room, listening to Sophia's soft breathing from the other bed. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. She would either overcome her deepest fears or confirm them in front of hundreds of people, including James Collins and the entire music faculty. As dawn broke, painting the sky outside her window with streaks of pink and gold, Emily finally drifted off. In her dreams, she played Rachmaninoff's concerto flawlessly, her fingers finding each note with precision and passion. But more importantly, in her dreams, she wasn't playing for anyone at all. She was simply playing, and that was enough. The day of the Spring Arts Festival arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers across campus. The university grounds buzzed with activity as staff made final preparations for the evening's performances. In the main auditorium, technicians tested lighting and sound equipment, while volunteers arranged programs on seats. Emily woke after only a few hours of restless sleep. Her stomach felt like it was filled with butterflies, not the gentle kind that poet writes about, but the frantic, panicky kind that seemed determined to escape. She sat up in bed and took a deep breath, trying to remember Mrs. Abernathy's advice about calming her nerves. Big day, Sophia said from the other bed, already awake and scrolling through her phone. How are you feeling? Like I might throw up, Emily admitted. Sophia put down her phone and sat up. That's normal. Everyone feels that way before a big performance. Even James Collins? Emily couldn't help asking. Especially guys like James. Sophia said confidently, though Emily suspected she was just saying it to make her feel better. They just hide it better because they've had more practice. Emily nodded, though she found it hard to imagine James feeling nervous about anything. In the 3 weeks since their encounter in the practice room, she'd seen him around campus occasionally. He always seemed perfectly at ease, surrounded by admirers, his confidence never wavering. "What time is your sound check?" Sophia asked, changing the subject. 2:00, Emily replied, glancing at the clock. It was just past 9 in the morning, hours yet before she needed to be at the auditorium. But she already felt the pressure of time bearing down on her. "Perfect," Sophia declared, jumping out of bed with unexpected energy. "That gives us time for a proper breakfast and a walk to clear your head." Emily wanted to protest that she couldn't possibly eat, but Sophia was already pulling clothes from her closet and laying them out with determination. "Trust me," her roommate insisted. "You need fuel for tonight, and sitting here all morning will just make you more nervous." As usual, Sophia was right. The simple act of getting dressed, walking to the campus cafe, and forcing down a small breakfast helped ground Emily in the present moment, rather than spiraling into worst-case scenarios about the evening ahead. After breakfast, they walked around the campus lake, the morning sun warming their faces. Students jogged past, dogs chased frisbees, and elderly couples strolled hand in hand along the path. The normalcy of it all was comforting, a reminder that regardless of what happened tonight, the world would continue turning. "Tell me again why you chose Rachmaninoff," Sophia said as they completed their second lap around the lake. Emily thought for a moment, trying to put into words what she felt when she played the piece. It's like he understood what it means to struggle but keep going anyway. There's this darkness in the music, but also this incredible hope. It's honest in a way that a lot of music isn't. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "I like that. It suits you." "What do you mean?" "You're kind of like that too," Sophia explained. "Quiet on the surface, but there's all this depth underneath. And you've been knocked down, but you keep getting back up." Emily smiled, touched by her friend's perception. "I don't know about that, but I do love the piece." "That's what matters," Sophia said simply. "Play what you love and people will feel it." By the time they returned to their dorm room, Emily felt calmer. Not confident exactly, but more centered, more ready to face whatever the evening might bring. At 1:30, she changed into the outfit she had chosen for her performance, a simple black dress with elbow-length sleeves and a modest neckline. Nothing flashy or distracting. The focus would be on the music, not on her. "You look like a real pianist," Sophia said approvingly. "I am a real pianist," Emily replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. It was the first time she had claimed the identity without qualification or doubt. Sophia grinned. "Yes, you are. Now go show them what that means." The auditorium was nearly empty when Emily arrived for her sound check. A few technicians moved around the space, adjusting lights and checking connections. The stage was dominated by a magnificent grand piano, far superior to the upright pianos in the practice rooms. Its polished surface gleamed under the stage lights, both inviting and intimidating. "You must be Emily Chen." A woman with a clipboard approached her. "You're scheduled for sound check at 2. Take a few minutes to get comfortable with the piano and we'll make sure the levels are right." Emily nodded and made her way to the stage. As she sat at the piano bench, adjusting its height, she noticed how different everything felt from this perspective. The empty seats stretched out before her, row after row, soon to be filled with people, professors, students, community members. The thought made her hands tremble slightly. "Remember what Mrs. Abernathy said," she told herself. "Play for the music, not for them." She began with scales to warm up her fingers, then moved into a few passages from the Rachmaninoff piece. The piano responded beautifully to her touch, its tone rich and resonant in a way the practice room pianos could never match. For a moment, she forgot about the upcoming performance and simply enjoyed the instrument, exploring its capabilities, letting her fingers dance across the keys. "Sounds good," the technician called from the sound booth at the back of the auditorium. "Any adjustments you need?" Emily shook her head. "It's perfect." After the sound check, she had several hours to kill before the evening performances began. Rather than return to her dorm room, where anxiety might overtake her again, she found a quiet corner in the green room backstage. Other performers came and went, some practicing last minute, others chatting nervously with friends or family. Emily kept to herself, reviewing the sheet music in her mind, visualizing her fingers moving across the keys. At one point, she looked up to see James entering the green room, surrounded by his usual entourage of admirers. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Emily's entire wardrobe. His hair was perfectly styled, his posture radiating confidence. He didn't seem to notice her sitting in the corner, or if he did, he gave no indication. Emily took a deep breath and closed her eyes, trying to focus on her own preparation rather than comparing herself to him. A gentle hand on her shoulder startled her from her thoughts. She opened her eyes to find Mrs. Abernathy standing before her, elegant in a deep blue dress, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate updo. "You came," Emily said, surprised and touched. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Mrs. Abernathy replied with a warm smile. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Emily admitted. "But also, ready, I think." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "That's exactly how you should feel. A little fear keeps us honest. Too much fear paralyzes us. You've found the balance." She sat down beside Emily, her movements graceful despite her age. "I wanted to give you something," she said, reaching into her small handbag. She pulled out a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny piano. "I wore this for my first major performance many years ago. I'd like you to wear it tonight." Emily stared at the bracelet, deeply moved by the gesture. "I can't take this," she protested. "You're not taking it," Mrs. Abernathy corrected. "You're borrowing it. Something borrowed for luck, as they say." She fastened it around Emily's wrist. "Besides, I expect you'll have many performances ahead of you after tonight. You can return it when you're ready." Before Emily could respond, the stage manager appeared in the doorway. 15 minutes, everyone. Performers for the first half, please be ready." Mrs. Abernathy squeezed Emily's hand. "I'll be in the audience. But remember, play for the music," Emily finished for her. "Not for the audience." "Exactly." With a final smile, Mrs. Abernathy made her way out of the green room to find her seat. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Emily could hear the murmur of the audience as the auditorium filled. Through the small monitor in the green room, she watched the first few performances. A string quartet, a soprano soloist, a modern dance piece. Each was met with enthusiastic applause. Then it was James's turn. Even on the small monitor, his presence was commanding as he walked onto the stage. He took a small bow before sitting at the piano, adjusting the bench with practiced precision. There was a moment of perfect silence, and then he began to play. Liszt's La Campanella poured from his fingers with astonishing technical precision. The piece was famous for its difficulty. Rapid jumps, complex fingerwork, lightning-fast runs up and down the keyboard. James executed every challenge flawlessly. It was, by any objective measure, a brilliant performance. The audience clearly thought so. When he finished with a dramatic flourish, they erupted in thunderous applause. James stood and bowed deeply, his expression one of practiced humility that didn't quite reach his eyes. As he exited the stage, the applause continued. "Emily Chen, you're up next," the stage manager said, appearing at her side. Emily nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. She stood on shaky legs and made her way to the stage entrance. From the wings, she could see the packed auditorium, every seat filled. In the front row, she spotted Mrs. Abernathy, who gave her an encouraging nod. A few seats away sat Professor Lee and other members of the music faculty, their expressions attentive and curious, and there, just returning to his seat after his own performance, was James. He glanced in her direction, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Whenever you're ready," the stage manager whispered. Emily took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were brighter than she expected, making it difficult to see individual faces in the audience. She walked to the piano, each step feeling both impossibly long and far too short. When she reached the bench, she turned to acknowledge the audience with a small bow, just as she had practiced. Then she sat, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The silver bracelet caught the light, glinting softly against her wrist. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. Play for the music, she thought. Just for the music. And then, with one final breath, she began to play. As Emily's fingers touched the keys, The world around her seemed to fade away. The lights, the audience, even her own anxiety, all of it receded like a tide pulling back from the shore. There was only the piano now, only the music waiting to be born. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 rang out through the auditorium, dark, resonant, filled with a yearning that seemed to reach into the soul. Emily played the slow, deliberate progression with a gentleness that belied the storm to come, each note a stepping stone into deeper waters. In the front row, Mrs. Abernathy closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. She knew this moment, the moment when a musician stops playing notes and starts making music. It couldn't be taught, only discovered, and not everyone found their way there. But Emily had found it now, right when it mattered most. As the piece developed, growing in complexity and emotion, Emily's body swayed slightly with the rhythm. Her face, usually guarded and cautious, was transformed by complete absorption in the music. Gone was the frightened girl who had frozen on stage years ago. In her place was a young woman who had something to say and had found her voice in Rachmaninoff's notes. The first movement built toward its climax, the tempo increasing, the harmonies growing richer and more complex. Emily's fingers flew across the keys, not with the mechanical precision of James's performance, but with a passionate intensity that made each phrase seem both surprising and inevitable. And then it happened. A wrong note. Just one, but clearly audible in a quiet passage. For a fraction of a second, Emily faltered, her rhythm breaking. In that moment, she caught sight of James in the front row, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't quite read. Time seemed to stop as memories flashed through her mind. James's mocking laugh in the practice room, the humiliation she had felt, the doubts that had plagued her for weeks afterward. The old Emily would have crumbled, would have let that one mistake derail her entire performance. But she wasn't that Emily anymore. Remember why you're playing, she told herself. For the music, not for him. Not for anyone but the music itself. She took a breath and continued, not trying to hide the mistake or overcompensate for it, but simply accepting it as part of the journey. As Mrs. Abernathy had taught her, great pianists don't let mistakes stop the music. They acknowledge them and move forward. And forward she went into the second movement with its achingly beautiful melody. This was the heart of the piece, not a display of technical prowess, but a confession of longing, of hope rising from despair. Emily poured herself into every phrase, every delicate run, every whispered chord. In the audience, something remarkable was happening. People who had been shifting in their seats, checking their programs, thinking about where they might go for dinner after the concert. They grew still. Conversations ceased. Even the usual coughs and rustles that punctuate any live performance faded away. There was only Emily and Rachmaninoff, sharing a conversation across time that somehow included everyone present. Professor Lee leaned forward in her seat, her usual composed expression replaced by one of genuine wonder. Beside her, the dean of the music school was perfectly motionless, his gaze fixed on the young woman at the piano as if seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. And James Collins, who had never doubted his place at the top of the musical hierarchy, who had dismissed Emily with casual cruelty weeks before, sat with his hands gripped tightly in his lap. His face, usually so carefully arranged to project confidence and superiority, now showed a complex mixture of emotions, admiration, confusion, and perhaps a touch of regret. As Emily moved into the final movement, the energy in the room was palpable. The tempo quickened, the music surging forward with renewed vigor. Technical challenges that had seemed insurmountable during her early practice sessions now flowed naturally from her fingers. Not because she had suddenly acquired James's flawless technique, but because she had found something more important, a reason to play that transcended technique. The final minutes of the concerto built toward an emotional climax, the themes from earlier movements returning and intertwining, like threads of a life being woven together. Emily's entire body was involved now, her shoulders rising and falling with the music's breath, her face reflecting every nuance of emotion in the score. When she struck the final chords, triumphant, resolute, affirming, they seemed to hang in the air for an endless moment, resonating not just in the space of the auditorium but in the hearts of everyone present. And then, silence, complete. Absolute silence. Emily's hands remained poised above the keys, her eyes closed. Her breathing rapid from the exertion and emotion of the performance. For a terrifying moment she thought she had failed, that the audience's silence was a form of rejection, a collective holding of breath before the awkward, polite applause that follows a disappointing performance. But then she heard it, a single sob from somewhere in the middle of the audience. And another, and then as if a dam had broken, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Not the polite, measured applause of an audience showing appreciation for technical skill, but the raw, almost desperate applause of people who have been moved, who have experienced something authentic and unexpected. Emily opened her eyes to see the audience rising to their feet, section by section, until the entire hall was standing. Their faces, now visible as her eyes adjusted to the lights, showed a range of emotions: wonder, joy, and in some cases, tears. In the front row, Mrs. Abernathy stood with the help of her cane, her face shining with pride. Next to her, Professor Lee was applauding with unusual vigor, a rare smile lighting her normally serious face. And James was standing too, his expression stunned as if witnessing something he had thought impossible. When their eyes met across the distance, he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, not quite an apology but an acknowledgement. A recognition. The applause continued, showing no signs of fading. Emily rose from the piano bench on shaky legs and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. As she straightened, she caught sight of Sophia at the back of the auditorium, jumping up and down with undisguised glee, mouthing words that Emily couldn't hear but understood nonetheless. "I told you so." After what seemed like an eternity, Emily made her way off stage, her legs barely supporting her. In the wings, the stage manager gave her a thumbs up, grinning widely. "They're going to be talking about that one for years," he said. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Other performances followed, but the buzz in the auditorium never quite died down. People kept glancing back at Emily where she sat in the audience for the second half, whispering to each other, smiling in her direction. When the festival concluded and the lights came up, Emily found herself surrounded by well-wishers, fellow students she had never spoken to before, faculty members eager to introduce themselves, community members wanting to express their appreciation. "Excuse me," a deep voice said from behind her. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Emily turned to find Dean Walker, head of the music school, standing there with Professor Lee. "That was quite remarkable, Ms. Chen," the dean said, his tone warm but professional. "Professor Lee tells me you haven't declared a major yet." "No, sir," Emily replied, still dazed from everything that had happened. "I'm still exploring my options." "Well, I'd like you to consider music," he said, handing her a business card. "We have a special scholarship for exceptional talents, and Professor Lee and I agree you would be an excellent candidate. Please come see me next week to discuss the details." Before Emily could respond, the dean was called away by another faculty member. Professor Lee lingered for a moment, studying Emily with thoughtful eyes. "You have something rare," the professor said quietly. "Not just skill, that can be taught, but what you showed tonight." She shook her head slightly as if unable to find the right words. "Don't waste it, and don't let anyone tell you it isn't there." As the crowd began to disperse, Emily spotted a familiar figure standing alone by the exit. James was waiting, his usual entourage nowhere to be seen. After a moment's hesitation, she approached him. "Congratulations," he said, his usual confident tone subdued. I've never heard Rachmaninoff played quite like that before." "Thank you," Emily replied, unsure what else to say. James seemed to struggle with his next words. "I was wrong," he finally said, looking directly at her. "About you. About music, maybe." He paused, then added with a hint of his old smile, "Don't expect me to say that again." Emily found herself smiling back. "I won't." "Good." He hesitated, then asked, "How did you do it? Connect with the audience like that?" "I've been playing for audiences since I was 6, and I've never—" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Emily thought about Mrs. Abernathy's words, about playing for the music instead of the audience. "Maybe that's the problem," she said gently. "Maybe we're not supposed to play for audiences at all." James's brow furrowed in confusion, but before he could respond, Sophia appeared at Emily's side, linking their arms together. "Sorry to interrupt whatever this is," she said. not sounding sorry at all. But we have a celebration to get to, and you're the guest of honor, piano girl. As Sophia led her away, Emily glanced back to see James still standing there, a thoughtful expression on his face, as if she had given him a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Outside the auditorium, the night was cool and clear, the campus lit by strings of lights that twinkled like stars. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting on a bench, resting after the excitement of the evening. There she is, the elderly teacher said, her voice filled with pride. The girl who played for the music. Emily sat beside her, emotion welling up in her throat. I couldn't have done it without you. Nonsense, Mrs. Abernathy replied, patting her hand. It was always in you. I just helped you find it. She glanced at the silver bracelet still on Emily's wrist. Keep that for now. I think you'll need it again soon. As they sat there, surrounded by friends and well-wishers, Emily realized that something fundamental had changed, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. The anxious girl who had hidden her talent behind fear and doubt hadn't disappeared entirely. She might never disappear completely, but she had been joined by someone stronger, someone who understood that perfection wasn't the point of music, or of life. The point was to play with your whole heart, mistakes and all. To find your authentic voice and have the courage to share it. To remember always that you play for the music, and the music, if you listen closely, always plays for you.